the very first game I ever worked on was shipped on 7 floppy disks. For Spider-Man 1, I could be wrong about this. I think we were in the neighborhood of like 600 to 700, maybe 1,000 polygons for a character. And games back then had a resolution of 320 by 200, which is just a tiny. I did those in D-Paint, back in the day in VGA, where it was like, back then it wasn't necessarily easier because it was less. The art form was more about what you could do with the limitations and how awesome your stuff could look.
With the 2002 game, do you remember anything as being ridiculously difficult and challenging, whether it be due to the technical limitations of using a new engine or other reasons or anything like that?
I'm trying to remember the specifics. I mean, making video games has always been about working within the limitations and trying to get the most out of it. Like I said, the very first game I ever worked on was shipped on 7 floppy disks. I said that to a dentist the other day when I was getting my teeth cleaned, and she was like, floppy disks.
Oh,
Floppy disks?
no.
Oh, I wasn't quite sure what a floppy disk was. And I felt so old in that moment. But, and games back then had a resolution of 320 by 200, which is just a tiny, like that was the full screen PC graphics, So dealing with limitations has just always been like a part of making games. Trying to remember things like having a tail on Scorpion was probably a difficult thing to try to do because of the skeleton system we had access to at that point. And just creating graphics for a PlayStation 2, or an original Xbox, like just, using target files and having these, finally working in true color as opposed to, VGA. So yeah, I'm sorry I don't have like a specific story. I mean, there's just a lot of it is just challenges of like, here's this 600 polygon count for all of the, each character is only going to have that. So how do we make each character look good in that kind of economy of polygons? Trying to make sure that the texture mapping looks good and isn't all stretched out all over the place, all these kinds of things. But that's just regular game stuff. It wasn't anything specific to pulling off Spider-Man, especially since, again, the short time frame, having the engine, we couldn't fix things like webs going off the top of the screen in that kind of time frame.
Yeah, so just a bit more, I guess, technical stuff. So technical stuff relative to making games in that time, that era. So what would be the difference between making games now and making games then regarding the software? Like even things like the 3D modeling software or even the UV mapping. I guess this may not even be an interesting question, but I was just curious of what it was.
Yeah, so at the time back then, we would build, pretty much everything was done. We were a 3D Studio Max house, so we would use 3D Studio was our 3D platform that we would build things on and export out of. At this point, I don't think we were even using Maya for very much, if anything, at that point. So it was all just 3D Studio Max, and that we would export out of. And then it would be probably Photoshop, whatever it was back then. This is before the creative suite of tools. It was more like Photoshop 3 kind of thing. So it was really just Photoshop and 3D Studio Max for the most part. And then we had tools to export out the textures. We'd export out whatever the file format was for the game. I don't recall now what the exported file format was, but we would export out the characters and the levels and then run it inside the engine. So there wasn't any kind of Unreal engine at that point, or not one that was widely available for everyone to be using or whatever. So it was just running the Neversoft engine, trying to, and export out of 3D Studio Max. And so as it relates to like what would be different today, I mean, the economy of polygons and color space for the textures is just like night and day. Um, Treyarch's very first video game that they did was called Die by the Sword, and the main character in that game, we did that game in a software called Lightwave, and the main character had 333 polygons. I remember 333 polygons for a whole character. Spidey, I think for Spider-Man 1, I could be wrong about this. I think we were in the neighborhood of like 600 to 700, maybe 1,000 polygons for a character. I mean, that's nothing by today's standards as far
Or
as like
millions
polygons.
now.
Right. Yeah. So, and so everything, would it be easier? I mean, you have tools that you can make something more photographically real at your disposal. But now with that, with that higher fidelity, things take longer too. Like you have, PBR textures, and you have a full spectrum of stuff that you can do in the materials with normal maps and all of that. So characters, a much more elaborate skeletal rig and mesh deformations that allow for blend shapes for things like shoulders and things like that, using combinations of blend shapes for the faces so the mesh can move around independently of bones, so that like the jaw opening and closing when someone's talking might be done with a skeleton. I mean, there's the level of stuff is so much higher now, but it also takes that much more time because of that fidelity. Is it easier to achieve something that looks more realistic? Yes, but along with it, it's harder. Like it's more layers, more stuff to keep control of, to manage, more work in some ways. It wasn't, back then it wasn't necessarily easier because it was less. The art form was more about what you could do with the limitations and how awesome your stuff could look,
Yeah.
given these limitations that everyone was having to deal with in game development.
Yeah. I guess what would, right? So because there was no I suppose studios nowadays still use custom in-house built engines. What would have been like I don't know if I'm going to word this correctly, but like the strict limitations of working within the engines. So obviously you would have had poly count that would be viewable on screen. I don't. Maybe LODs existed at a really basic level back then.
They did, for sure.
They did. And then you've got like text trim sheets for textures to keep I don't know what the term is, but the numbers lower. What resolutions and stuff were like textures? I guess if any of those questions.
I'm just trying to remember. Like back then, we didn't have to necessarily. Our exporter would pack the texture pages for us, and so we could have a folder of individual textures. And then during the sort of packing stage, when it would get transferred into the game engine, it would kind of pack up those textures and take it along with it. The textures would have been like target files, true color target files. Actually, I take that back. So, I mean, the way all of our textures would have been developed at that time, it would have been layered PSDs, and the PSD file would have been like your master file. And so it has all of the layer information in it. And then we would during export, we would export a target file. Target files are really dead simple. They're just like an index with just a header at the top. And so then we would, export that stuff. And then as far as the geometry stuff goes, just, again, you're dealing with like a 600 to 1,000 polygon character. It's got UVs on it just like you would today, but they're just more elaborate because way more polys.
That's cool. Yeah.
No, so we wouldn't have to pack out the texture sheets. I mean, it was just we would try to maintain a consistent UV size or scale throughout, so that you didn't have like crazy distorted, like really high resolution pixels over here and really stretched low fuzzy pixels over here. You try to keep a certain balance so that things would look kind of even across the screen. but you are doing all kinds of tricks to sort of cheat and give his face a little bit more, and taking it away from the corner down over here a little bit, just so that, in the end, the final presentation is the best it can be based on the limitations.
Yeah. Were normal maps a thing back then? Because I know as like during the cutscenes or like the cinematics in the game, like I noticed that obviously it's like the super high resolution character where you can see like the hexagons in the suits, and it does look like the webbing is raised. I don't know if it's in like in every shot and every scene, but it does look raised. So I was just curious if that was like modeled or if that was normal. But you said that
I don't think
then.
at that stage they were normals. I think they were a bump map, and I think it was just a higher res texture and model. So our cutscene team, we had a team of artists that were focused on just doing the cutscenes, and they would have cutscene characters, and so for every character that was going to be in the cutscene, there would be sort of a cutscene level of them, like an LOD, the highest level version of them for the cutscenes. And because they were pre-rendered, we were basically playing a movie. The intro movie for that game was created by Blur. So that wasn't my in-house art team. That was created by Blur. They did effects and video game like movies and stuff at that time in Santa Monica. And because, again, of that shortened time frame that we had, we worked with Tim Miller and the guys over at Blur to generate the intro. And so they remodeled their own Spider-Man off of our stuff and did like a third one to bring it into their whole pipeline and generate their stuff. So it's kind of three different things going on. You've got the opening movie sequence, title sequence from Blur with its own high-res stuff, and it's doing everything as if it was a Pixar movie, like fully trying to render it out, everything. And then we had our team, a very small team of like 3 people, maybe, trying to create our cutscenes based on the highest LOD of our characters, and then also doing like pre-rendered stuff for that, and they would render that stuff out. And then we had the in-game characters, and so sometimes the little, we could move the camera around and have an in-game action happen and do some storytelling in there, but now you're dealing with the LOD of what's in-game. And so you kind of have all 3 of those things kind of playing out, like when you're watching the game. It's transitional game development time in our game history, right? And so as things roll forward, having pre-rendered cutscenes almost for a while there became kind of not a cool thing. Like the cool thing was to like look at how awesome our in-game graphics look. They don't have to be pre-rendered anymore. Kind of was this transition that sort of like started to happen at that time. And so that's where that kind of evolved eventually. It's been a pretty wild ride. I mean, my very first thing I ever did working in video games was the little icons on the map on F-117A Strike Eagle. And it was just the map icons at the end for you parachuted out here or you refilled here. And I did those in D-Paint, back in the day in VGA, where it was like, just moving. It was almost like bathroom tiles. I mean, these pixels were so big and just popping like colors in there to go all the way up to like normal maps now and like a full-on PBR texture, texturing flow and elaborate 3D characters. It's just been a very interesting ride over the 30 plus years of making games, of watching all that, being a part of it, evolving and seeing it grow and change. And it's been really fun. Looking forward to my next chapter.
If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, support the channel on Ko-fi and Patreon. And if you didn't enjoy the video, like, comment, subscribe, support the channel on Ko-fi and Patreon. Right, good luck.